Okay, so while the humans of Zoom come online, let me just tell you, on Monday we talked about consciousness, and in that conversation we kind of spoke about, well, you know, there are different states of consciousness. There is a particular there are changes in your consciousness. So for example, a physiological, sorry, I'm a little sleepy, just a little. An example of a physiological variation is if you're really hungry, right? Your body chemistry is changing a little bit, and the hunger is the one thing that has precedence over everything. Another psychological example, or an example of a psychologically altered state of consciousness, that's the correct term to refer to it, is hypnosis. Okay, the science is out on this. We don't know whether it's actually something that you can achieve or not, but consider it as an example of an altered state of psychological consciousness. We also obviously know that there are various chemical substances that can achieve the same effect. So you can have consciousness altering drugs that people do consume, and that is another example of a different state of an altered state of psychological consciousness. Okay, so we talked a little bit about that, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because in that conversation, like I said, we talked about your sensation and perception, and that's what we need to discuss in today's class, sensation and perception. So it's something that you're doing right now as well. Your sensation and perception are at work in this class as you're sitting here, you're looking at this auditorium. It's at work for me as well. And it's kind of like partially effortful and partially effortless. Okay? And I'll tell you why as we go through this. But it's important to recognize the difference between what is sensation and what is perception, and how are they related to each other, right? So let me ask you, top of your head, what is sensation defined as? Like when I use the word sensation, what comes to mind? Did you say something? Sense as a, what's a sense? I can barely hear you. I can't hear you. Sense of touch, sense of hearing, sense of smell, sense of sight, and you don't want to have an aloo samosa after class? Taste. 5 senses. Okay. Yes, absolutely. And people online are also saying good morning. Okay, good morning. Feeling okay, fine. I get it. It's fine. Just okay. Yes, Iman.
Yeah, so sensation is basically how your body receives information about the internal and the external environment. So you can get information about what's happening inside your body, for example, your temperature and other things, and then outside your environment, like several factors, like
Say more about
so maybe
outside connection.
So outside your environment, you can obviously feel stuff like the temperature and the sense of touch, and this I can't really think of things right now, but there's several things that obviously are part of your sensation. Yes. Your sight, what you can hear, your sight, and
go on.
Okay.
What are you using to understand what I'm saying?
Okay. So basically, what I mean is that when it comes to our five senses, so it's not just information about the external environment; it's also the internal environment, and that's what makes up your sensation. And even like if you talk about the external environment, so also cues that you get from like people, maybe vibes that you get. I think that is also part of sensation
Vibes. Define
from
this
people.
vibes.
Okay, so vibes would be, I think, hidden cues that you get from people, or like stuff that they maybe don't say, but you can make out that what's their intention behind saying a particular thing, maybe.
Right. Okay. Lots of things to think about in what you said. So, firstly, this internal external division that you spoke about, let me clarify a little bit of that. Okay. It's very relevant, and your answer is great because it gives us a lot of room to discuss sensation and perception in class. So here's the thing. When you use the word in psychology of sensation, you are talking very much about the inputs that you are receiving from the world around you. Okay? So it's external input, right? It is through perception that you make sense and you give meaning and are able to understand all that you are sensing. That is called perception. Okay? And that is very much an internal process. Now, when we are talking about sensation, we are referring to the fact that there is so much visual, olfactory, auditory, tactile, which is touch. Um, what is the fifth sense? I always forget one, I'm sorry. Olfactory is smell, auditory is hearing, visual, right, taste. I can't think of a fancy word for that, I apologize. So when you receive this sort of input, right, smell, touch, taste, vision, sound, what happens is that inside your brain, you have sensory receptors. Okay? They receive this information. And we'll talk about processes specific to each of these senses, but right now I want you to broadly understand like how the entire machine works. Okay? So you receive this information and you're like, it goes up into your brain. Okay, so we call this part of receiving information bottom up processing. Okay? Once it's in here, it goes to whatever is the relevant part of your brain. So for example, it'll go to the visual cortex if you're receiving information through vision. In that process of in that bottom up processing, what happens is that this sense data is converted into electrical signals, right? Those electrical signals go into your visual cortex, and that is where you make meaning, okay? That is where your perception kicks in. And through that ability, you understand, for example, that I am waving my hand, right? That's how you make sense of it. So that particular thing is called top-down processing. Okay? So it happens in two ways. Bottom up is the receiving of input from the environment, sensory input, sensory data. And top down is where you have received it, have processed it, and now it is something you understand, right? This is a table, there's a water bottle on it. I am listening to a lecture. I am speaking, I am delivering a lecture. I can hear the sound of my own voice, right? And as I hear the sound of my own voice, I'm also looking at all of you in class. I'm also looking at you guys online and trying to make sure I'm reading the chat and so on and so forth. While all of this is happening clearly, it's not like first you visualize and then you hear and then you smell and then you taste and then you touch. That's not how it works, right? These usually happen together. In fact, they're constantly, always happening together. Okay. So imagine this situation: you are really hungry, really, really hungry, and you are late to class. Yeah. And as you're late to class, you're like walking past the canteen, and you smell. What do you like to eat in the mornings? Let me guess, you're so young that you haven't discovered that breakfast is an essential meal, right? Okay. So assume it's me, and I am running late to class, and I walk past some coffee shop, and I smell like freshly baked bread. Okay? And I'm really hungry, and I'm really late to class, but I'm really hungry, and I can smell this fresh bread. What's going to happen? Tell me, in this little tiny situation that I've described to you, right? I'm late, I'm running. While I'm running, I pass by a cafe, I notice the cafe, I smell the fresh bread. Tell me, in this tiny situation, what kind of bottom-up and top-down processing is happening? Just top of your head. Since everybody on Zoom is asleep, you guys tell me. You have to be really loud. I've only smelled it. Yeah, good. Okay. What is happening? Okay, so let me just reiterate what you said. What's your name? Huh? Amna. So Amna in your class, wake up. Amna in your class is saying that what's going to happen in this situation is that the smell is something that is the predominant sensation perception that is at play, right? Notice I mentioned I'm really hungry, right? So that's something I'll come back to. But the smell is the predominant side, and that is where I might pause and stop to maybe make a decision about, do I want to eat? Do I want to run? What do I want to do? The reason I talked about the hunger is to show you the relationship between your state of consciousness and your perception and sensation. That physiological arousal state in me of being really hungry is something that is influencing where I'm perceiving what, right? But sometimes sense data, right, can introduce or can be so novel or so striking without this situational context, okay, that it can alter your consciousness. So, for example, very simple. If you go to a grocery store or a supermarket that has a bakery in-house, you always smell fresh vanilla and you smell fresh bread, and what happens? You buy it. If you're anything like me, you're going to walk out with a box of cookies. What's happening there? I'm not even hungry, right? I'm not hungry at my age. I shouldn't be eating all this sugar, but no, I want it. Suddenly I'm hungry, right? Do you get what I'm trying to illustrate, that relationship between sensation, perception, consciousness? Okay. That's why we're studying them together a little bit. Yeah. colors?
How like stuff works because yeah, a lot of like diet websites that seems like oh even like small things or even like this is certain color things, right? So like almost like you add stuff of it.
Oh, okay. Now I understand. The point being made is that on certain incorrect and inappropriate diet websites, the point that is made is that, oh, if you eat in like a small plate, you will eat less. That is actually correct. But I'll explain why. There's science behind it. As far as the colors are concerned, I don't know how factual that is. So let's not talk about that. But the size of your plate will limit the amount of food you put into it, right? But because it's a plate, your perception of it, you'll fill it up, right? Your perception of it is that this is a full plate of food. And so when you're done eating, your mind is communicating, you've eaten a full plate of food, you're full. You got it? That little thing is called a perceptual set. That's your mental predisposition to perceive certain things in certain ways. So, perceptual set, if I give you this really sensitive example, maybe you'll understand. It's like, okay, how many of you would call yourself racist? Nobody, right? Okay. How many people think that I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of a correct way to phrase this. Okay, here's the deal. If I'm assuming you all know who Rihanna is, right? Assuming also you all know who Taylor Swift is, right? Okay. What is the defining difference between them in terms of race? One is a black woman and one is a white woman, yes? Right. If I asked you, who do you think is, okay, I can't ask you that. But you will think that they're equally beautiful, right? If I ask you, you'll be like, oh, they're equally beautiful in their own way, okay? However, you will notice in yourself when you are living or traveling to a country where the population is predominantly white, you are going to notice two things. That, and this is a very common thing, that every person who looks like you is going to look at you and smile at you. And when you are in crowds of predominantly light-skinned people, you're going to feel invisible sometimes. I don't know how to discuss this without getting into a conversation about race, and that is something that we don't have time for. But that invisibility versus visibility tells you a lot about perceptual set, but also, you know how there's this entire conversation about how brown and black skin is just as beautiful, and we have these conversations about body diversity, right? So a lot of this is coming from the recognition that because of continued exposure to certain types of bodies and certain types of skin that is positioned as beautiful or the epitome of beautiful, what has happened is that we are predisposed to looking at ourselves as inferior in many ways. Because our contextual, perceptual, set, mental predisposition, which is fed by our assumptions and our beliefs, it makes us look at particular Eurocentric standards as beautiful. And so whenever you're in a crowded space, when you see someone who conforms to that Eurocentric standard of beauty, you are drawn to them. Okay? And that is why, go home today, ask yourself the question I asked you initially, ask yourself again. Very important. It's also very difficult to realize within yourself that as a person of color, you can also be racist. But you live and learn, right? So anyway, from that little social justice segue, come back now to your class. Any questions about the difference in sensation and perception? Yeah. Does all sensation result in perception? Yes, but if there is some sort of damage to sense receptors, right, or the organs that are responsible for taking the sense data in, then you will not be able to perceive. Right? So without sensory data coming in, you cannot perceive because you're not registering, right? So for example, I've been saying for example a lot today, I need to stop. So for instance, one of the symptoms of coronavirus is the loss of smell and taste, right? Why is this so concerning? Because that loss of smell, loss of taste is coming not from actual, well, the science is still being done on this, but the research is saying that doctors are worried because a loss of smell and loss of taste is not because the nose or the gluten or the taste buds, which produce glutamate, which allows you to taste, is not because there's something wrong with the organs. They're fine. The problem is the neurological pathways that process that information top down, right? Those are impacted. And that's why it's not like the thing you're smelling isn't smelling, right? You just can't perceive the smell. Or when you're eating something, it's not like it doesn't have flavor. But you can't perceive the flavor because the top-down processing is not working. Or maybe, we don't know, right? That's why I said I don't know exactly, or maybe the transfer of the sensory data to whatever responsible cortex is not happening. So either the bottom-up process is interrupted or the top-down process is interrupted, but either way, the loss of smell, the loss of taste is more a neurological symptom. And more cases are coming out now of people who have recovered from the virus, it's been a year, but are still unable to taste. Right? And what they're doing now is they're retraining their brain to be able to taste. And how they're doing it is by using really pungent and really strong flavors, a lot of sour flavors, because those are really sharp sense data, right? So they're using those to try and recover and rebuild those pathways. And because of the loss of taste, they also report that they've become a lot more sensitive to the textures of food. Wake up, miss. Good morning. So they've become really sensitive to the textures of their food as well. Which is happening because the sensation that should be taking place of taste is gone, right? And this is another thing that happens with our sensation perception. When there is something lost in our senses, our other senses will overcompensate. This is correct. It is not a myth. Okay, this is correct. Which is why texture has predominance now over taste, because, well, taste isn't working, right? In reference to the coronavirus symptoms that I just talked about. Aisha.
Assalamu alaikum, ma'am. My question is that you talked about invisibility versus visibility. That tells us a lot about perception. So what exactly is invisibility and visibility?
Are you talking about the race?
No, you just made that point that invisibility and visibility tells a lot about perception. And you connected with that example of race, exactly. So, like, I'm not getting exactly what do we mean by invisibility and visibility over here? And how does it tell us about our perception?
Well, it doesn't tell you about your perception. It tells you about your perceptual set in the context of the example of race. But on a broader sense, visibility and invisibility as applied to perception and sensation, we talk about two things. We talk about habituation and we talk about sensory adaptation. Two different elements, and maybe they'll make sense to you in terms of visibility and invisibility, although what I was talking about was more about how at our core we're all a little racist, and that's something we need to confront. But coming back to your question, sensory adaptation refers to when you are looking at something, right? So we are in this auditorium right now. Sorry that you're not, but we are in this auditorium right now, and it's got these gray brick walls and these wooden walls, right? The walls are brick, wood. Did you think about this before I just pointed it out to you? No. How many people actually sat here, came into this auditorium and said, whoa, brick and wood walls, wow. Why not? Because sensory adaptation allows you to tune out this stuff, right? You walk into the auditorium, you're like, whoa, this is huge, I need to find a seat. So you are looking at the seat. It's not like you're not perceiving these wood and brick walls. Visually you are, but they just are not important. Okay? Sensory adaptation is working here. You've seen walls everywhere. You know what a wall is, right? Right now you need a seat. And to find a seat, imagine, this is an unfamiliar space, you don't know who sits where. All of your attention is diverted towards that seat, right? So this is why sensory adaptation is what helps us from becoming overwhelmed by sensory data. And something important to mention is, it's relevant also and interesting, is that with sensory data, a lot of children who are on the spectrum, one of the most commonly reported, symptoms or situations that kids on the spectrum face is that if they are in a room with very bright lights, flashing lights particularly, loud and electronic or really fast-paced music, it is very upsetting for them. Okay. The reason for that is that there is a processing overload within these children. But we can also be overrun by sensory data, right? So do you remember when I was telling you guys that it's really hard for me to use the presentation, the PowerPoint, and teach you in person, and teach you online, and look at the chat, and translate what you're saying, and so on. Can you imagine the amount of sensation and perception that's happening, conscious, right, at the same time? So that's also processing overload, which is why I was unable to do it effectively, right? So something to think about. Processing overload is real, but sensory adaptation helps us. The second thing is habituation, which we kind of also spoke about when we were talking about human development and cognitive development. We did discuss habituation. Habituation is why it's why every time you see your loved one's face, you're not like, oh, wow. It's because you just get used to stimuli because you're constantly exposed to it, right? So two different sort of parts of your sensation abilities. All right, so online. Perceptual set refers specifically to biases, but also tricks of perception like optical illusions. It includes optical illusions, and we're going to do that also, for which I think we'll do this on Monday, because there are a couple of like examples. There's an arrow experiment, which is really interesting. And I wanted to show you guys that as well, so we'll do that on Monday. But yes, absolutely, optical illusions are tricks of perception, but they're tricks of perception because they work because of our perceptual sets, all right? And those perceptual sets are still also informed by our assumptions, right? Conscious assumptions and unconscious assumptions. Because we can, as humans, we are able to have conscious and unconscious bias both. Right? I'm sorry, I don't know, that's not the first thing you know, I'm not sure what you said this. We don't look at our environment because it is not relevant for our survival instincts. We look at things that are useful or relevant for our purpose, and we disregard everything else because we don't need them for survival. Yeah, you're right. The things that stand out to us are the things that we need most, and that is why sensory adaptation actually is an adaptive quality, right? It means sensory adaptation at work could be you are on a busy street. You want to cross the road, there's a bus coming at you, you're aware of the bus, you're able to tune out that busy street because of sensory adaptation. It shuts out all that noise, all the rush, all the buzz around you, allows you to focus. Remember, we talked a little bit about inattentional blindness, sorry. That is another survival mechanism, right? And they're so related because, I mean, when you're paying attention to something, your sensation perception is at work. All right. Change the chat. Are they not to everyone? I don't know how to do that. Is it fixed? Why? Sorry, a segue. Do you know how to fix this? I didn't do this. It's not like a... Oh. I have fixed it. It's fixed. Now you can go ahead. Cool. No, this is what you call a DM. But can somebody online type something, please? Cool.
Yes, ma'am, it's fixed now.
Okay. Now I need to refer to my notes. 1 second. Right. So, you know how I told you that top-down processing and bottom-up processing is how sensation becomes perception, correct? And I also told you, okay, it's not like you're just going to first take care of your visual sensation perception, then you're going to take care of your auditory sensation perception. It's not like that, right? It's happening very simultaneously at the same time, and this wonderful, unique ability of the brain, which allows you to perceive and sense, but also to move your hands like this. That's parallel processing, right? This is why the brain is something that we should all literally be obsessed with. Forget about the new iPhone. Like, think about this thing that we're all carrying around and rarely, really, to be honest, use as well as we should. Okay. Parallel processing is what allows us to literally exist as functional. And by functional right now, I just mean like in a survival sort of way, okay? Because that's anyway. So, but within this parallel processing, there are a couple of things important for us to remember, right? When we talk about sensation, what is needed for us to be able to perceive something? Or sense something and then perceive it?
Consciousness?
Hmm?
Is it consciousness that enables us to perceive, sir?
Sorry, can you repeat that? There's a little bit of echo, so I was not able to hear you.
Is it consciousness that enables us to perceive things
Yes,
and
correct.
whatever we sense?
Actually, because some of our perception is unconscious as well. We don't consciously tell ourselves that, oh, like, this is a chair, right? It's automatic, rather. Let me not use the word unconscious. Let's say automatic. Yeah, anyone else? Input or external cue? Yeah, let's go back to the internal, external thing we were talking about. So I told you that your environment is the outside world, and inside you make sense of the environment and you understand what's happening around you. And I also told you that your sensory receptors are responsible for that capacity of sensing and perceiving, right? But for us to be able to perceive things, there's something called an absolute threshold. Okay? So I'm going to switch my language now and make it more formal. Consider that our environment, instead of saying inputs, let's talk about stimuli. Yeah? Our environment is full of different sorts of stimuli. We perceive some and not others. Like I was talking about the wall. Yeah? You don't notice the wall. Okay? You do see it. It's not like you're not perceiving it, but you're just not regarding it in your thought. Okay? But sometimes there are things that you cannot see. You don't see them. Okay? Those things that you don't see, don't hear, maybe you don't smell, is because they don't have what is called the absolute threshold. Okay, so for us to be able to detect, notice a stimuli, it has to meet this thing called the absolute threshold. The absolute threshold means that at least 50% of the time, at least half the time, that stimuli is noticeable. Okay? So, this wall, this chairs, my voice is at least half the time detectable, right? And hence you are able to sense it and then make sense of it and hence perceive it. Okay? But stuff that is not meeting that absolute threshold, so things that are not visible or are visible only for less than half the time, they don't meet the absolute threshold criteria, and so they fall out of our sensation, out of our perception. Okay, they're not detectable. If something is not detectable, you can't perceive it because you won't even sense it, right? Muhammad Ali. Are you saying something? I lowered your hand. Do you want to say something?
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you now.
So I wanted to ask a question about relating to perception. So I read this like in my previous semester in one assignment. I read this about psychology that there's regarding perception there's one thing relating to phenomena and another related phenomena and another relating to phenomena. Okay, like what we perceive externally and internally.
I'm sorry.
So if you could clarify on that, and another question is that जो perception होती है, isn't it like guided by our previous experiences, right? अगर मतलब हमारे जो पुराने experiences होते हैं उनकी basis पे हम अपने perceptions develop करते हैं. I mean senses होती हैं वो शुरू से लेकर आखिर तक हमारी एक जैसी रहती हैं, लेकिन perceptions होती हैं वो बदल जाती हैं और ये develop होती हैं as a child grows up. So if you could clarify that as well.
Okay, you have to repeat everything because there's a lot of echo, and I couldn't clearly hear you. I'm so sorry. I know you asked 2 questions, but I didn't understand them because I couldn't clearly hear you. So if you don't mind, can you repeat and speak a little slowly and enunciate, because there's a lot of echo, so it's hard when you speak quickly for me to understand. Sorry about that.
I'm really sorry. Can you hear me now clearly?
Okay, slowly, all right?
All right. Okay, I'll ask my question. I was saying कि last semester मैंने एक assignment में पढ़ा था psychology के बारे में कि perception according for perception there is this thing like एक होती है mnemonic like कांट की मतलब एक होती है ना डिस्टिंक्शन कांट में नहीं mnemonic और phenomenon के मतलब internal and external perceptions. So can you not hear me?
Okay, I'm sorry, you have to type this, all right? Because which is are you talking about phenomenology? In your question? Because I think that's where I kept losing you. You said in last semester you studied something and then I couldn't understand. So do you want to start over? Sorry. Phenomena and what? Nomina. Okay, I don't know what that is. I'm sorry. Do psychics have a sensory mechanism that allows them to look at energies as they claim? How are psychic abilities linked to perception and threshold? What does psychology say about psychic abilities? Do you really want to know? Why don't you look that up and tell me? Because I have no idea. I am not an encyclopedia. But in all fairness, I think that, okay, we can talk about a couple of things. What you're talking about is extrasensory perception, okay? We have no evidence that this exists, but it is so hard to be able to study extrasensory perception because it's self-reported. So how can you rely on self-report, okay? First thing. Second thing, we also want to talk about, have you guys heard of subliminal messaging, right? That it's like going into your mind and it's impacting you, but you don't even know and you never know, and your whole life you just, you're just like a puppet being pulled here and there by the subliminal messaging. Science is very much out on that. Okay. There is no actual evidence that subliminal messaging exists. Okay. And again, the issue is because it's so unconscious. Right? The whole notion is that it's subliminal, meaning that it's happening on a very different level, and unconsciously you are making sense of it, right? So those are 2 areas in which absolutely sensation perception is relevant, and we don't really have proof that they exist. So I would say psychology would say that psychics are making it up. But in my opinion, I think that a lot of psychology is informed by Western notions. And maybe sometimes there are things you can't test by research and you just have to believe in or not believe in. You're welcome to it. I mean, it's your choice. So, no judgment, but that's what I would say. All right? Okay. I want to talk about the absolute threshold a little bit more. Okay? So, like I said, when something doesn't meet the absolute threshold, it just passes by you, right? In the sense that because it's not detectable, you don't really notice it, and because you don't notice it, you don't perceive it. The other thing I want to ask you, I'm asking you this question. Okay, Ali, this is a good question. I'm going to come back to you with that. The other thing that we talk about, have you ever thought, like, if you enter this really crowded room and you will be able to hear the voice of your best friend? Has that ever happened to you? No? Yes? 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 Live up? Yeah? Okay. What is it that allows you to notice your best friend's voice in this super crowded, really loud space? It's a difference of voice, you're right. Absolutely right. That difference of voice, okay, that allows you to pick up on your best friend's voice, and you're right, using your auditory senses, is called a just noticeable difference. Okay. That just noticeable difference is how you can maybe recognize or differentiate between your elder sister's face and your younger sister's face, right? Or that just noticeable difference is how you would be able to say, this is my, sorry, I'm thinking better example. This is my cat, and that's your cat, Yeah, but yeah. So two little baby kittens born at the same time, looking very similar, but you know the difference, right? So this just noticeable difference is also an adaptive function, and it starts when you're very young, when you're in infancy. The JND, it's called JND, just noticeable difference. That is what allows babies to recognize their mother's voice. Yeah, it's just it's a difference in decibel levels, right? It's really, really a tiny difference. That's why it's called just noticeable difference. And when we talk about just noticeable difference, we also have to acknowledge that there's no quantity that we can say in absolute terms is a just noticeable difference, right? So it's not, I wouldn't say that you're able to, as a baby, recognize your mother's voice because it's 2 decibels higher than everybody else's. But I would say the baby can recognize its mother's voice because the voice is 2% different. So just noticeable difference, we do not look at it in absolute terms, we look at it in percentage terms, because that percentage allows us to see how the JMD can change, right? Sorry, let me say this to you in technical language. This percentage thing is called Weber's law. Weber's law of percentage difference, and what it says is that the percentage difference is constant. The amount might fluctuate, the percentage is constant, right? So the absolute could change 2 decibels higher, 3 decibels lower, whatever, but in percentage terms, it is that constant percent, whatever that percentage is. So two lights, for example, must differ in intensity by 8%, not by 100 watts or 50 watts, right? Because 100 watts, okay, how do I know? How can you know? How can we all tell? Again, you're not here, I'm sorry guys, but there are white lights on the sides of the auditorium and there's yellow light up top. How do I know? There's yellow light up there and white light on the side. Yeah, thank you. It's just noticeable difference that allows me to say that, yeah, this is like yellow light and that's white light. Okay. And that we will look at in percentage terms. Because you will always be able to differentiate between a yellow light and a white light, correct? But some yellow lights might be very, very bright, and some, and some white lights might be faint. But you can tell the difference, right? That's because of the just noticeable difference. All right, I think so there's a very cute and sweet experiment that they did. I think, personally, I think it's adorable. A little meme, maybe. It's still very cute. These researchers, they had a bunch of children, little children, about 6 years old. And what they did was, oh, wait, sorry, Jo, you have a question or something to say. Go ahead.
Question about the noticeable difference. When a mother has twin babies, identical twins, she can notice the difference amongst them, right? But us being, if we see them, we can never differentiate between them. I mean, you know, we see them as the same exact baby. We cannot notice the difference between them. So that, like, how can we not notice the difference? And, you know, how can their family or their mother notice the noticeable difference between identical twins?
That you would only notice the difference if they were non-identical twins, and you're not being able to notice the difference because they're identical twins?
Yes, I mean, they're family members and someone close to them, they can notice the difference between the babies. But if we, for example, see the babies for the first time, or we do not see them as often, we can never tell the difference that which baby is which one.
To be honest, I am a fully grown adult. Most of my friends have babies, and I can't tell the difference between their different family children. This is recorded, I probably shouldn't say that. But it's hard to, all newborns look the same to me. Okay? That's my perceptual set. That's my predisposition, lack of exposure to children, maybe, I don't know. But coming back to your example, the thing that allows the mother to differentiate between the babies is much more than just visual. Okay? And the thing that you will use to differentiate between two identical twins will be much more than just what they look like. So you're focusing only on one sense, right? And I understand why, because you're thinking about the just noticeable difference, and you're right that perhaps in completely identical twins, on a visual level, there is no JND, right? There is no percentage difference in their appearance, and that's why they look like the exact same person, which is why you would then use other differences to differentiate, right? You would use their voice, tone. You can still differentiate between those, because in that there will be a J and D. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay, right, definitely. I want to come back to this thing that Ali has written. Ali has written? Unlike sensation, which remains unguided throughout, perception is guided by a person's past. As a child develops, its perception is developed as well. While senses remain constant after organs are fully grown, it doesn't develop any further. Okay, so insofar as organs are concerned, something for you to think about is that some of our sensory organs do decline as we age, right? I mean, I'm standing right here and I constantly tell you I can't hear you. It happens. Fact. Vision. You get older, you maybe need reading glasses, right? Taste. Things can happen to you that can destroy your taste buds. So it's not that your senses remain constant. I would disagree, okay? They may regress. You may also work to sharpen your senses. So if you have an aptitude for music, you are, as you grow older, let's say you work to develop that aptitude for music, you are sharpening your perception and your sensation of music, and that will allow you to differentiate between, a G minor and an F whatever on a guitar, right? Something that I have been trying to do for many years, and I have to admit I have no musical ability. I don't know what the just noticeable difference is, but somebody who practices music will be able to acquire that, okay? So that's your question. Now I just want to end on one last thing, which brings me back to the beginning. So we've kind of gone full circle. Got excited. We've gone full circle. When we talk about perceptual set, we are referring to why we perceive things one way and not the other. Okay? For example, we see two men both speaking in raised voices. One is black, one is white. The black guy is described as shouting, the white guy is described as raising his voice. Small example of how context affects our perception. Okay. Second, have you ever gone on some sort of mountain adventure? You have? Yeah? Climbed the hill? Yeah? Yeah? All right. So, if you have ever done something like that, when you are at the bottom of a very steep hill, what's your motivation going to be like? Like, do you think you're going to be able to saunter up? Okay, I'm going to add even more details to this image. Imagine that you're at the bottom of a hill, big hill. You have a heavy backpack. You have already walked like 4 kilometers. It is really sunny. You have half a water bottle left. And you're pretty tired, okay? And now you have to climb this hill. What are you going to think about this climb? Peer pressure? You'll feel demotivated, obviously. Sorry that I'm not obvious. You'll feel demotivated, yeah. Yeah, you might be motivated to see the beautiful view. Now I flip the situation a little bit, huh? You're super well rested. Because you're a person of privilege, somebody's carrying your backpack for you. And you've got a great breakfast in you, you're fully caffeinated, you're wearing your Columbia hiking boots. Now tell me about the hill. You want to climb it, no? You want to test out your hiking boots, you want to climb the hill. What is that? What does that tell you about your perception of the hill? In both of these examples, tell me, in the first example, what do you think of that hill? You think it's going to be hard to do. In the second example, you're thinking it's easier to do. You're right, Sarah. Perceptual set. Context matters. Your situation matters. It affects your sensation perception. This brings us back also to that earlier example of running late to class but stopping at the smell of bread. Right? Context matters. It affects us. Motivation matters. Right? If I'm hungry, I'm going to perceive food more strongly than anything else. Right? So something, that's the last thing. And sorry. And the reason I was giving you this hill example is because researchers found that a hill is going to be perceived as steeper than it actually is if the person supposed to climb the hill is tired and is carrying a heavy backpack. So that is why context, motivation is part of our perception or related to our perception. And perception is what? The way we see things. The way we make meaning of things. When I say see, I'm talking about making meaning, not visual, right? Because we have 5 senses. Got it? Okay. Okay, this is a rather depressing experiment, but I'll tell you about it. It's also on your slides, which I'll upload today. When you listen, you all know the kind of music you listen to has an effect on mood. Right? We all know this. I'm so happy today because I was listening to some really happy music in the car to wake me up. Maybe you can do that next time also. So I don't feel like I'm crushing your souls and killing your spirit by teaching at 8:30 in the morning. But when you listen to happy music or sad music, it influences your mood. Researchers found that when you're listening to sad music, and you are given a list of words, you are more likely to perceive those words as sad. So instead of morning, morning as M-O-R-N-I-N-G, which would be subah, you read, you read morning as M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, meaning grieving. Why? Because the mood has shifted. Another example of how context matters for our perceptual set, for our perceptual abilities. It's not just about being able to receive sensory data, right? It's about how we make sense of what we perceive. Receive. Okay? That is our class. I am doing better on time management. Goodbye, children of Zoom. No, wait, don't go. Don't go. Sorry, I lied. You have a quiz next week. Were you told about it? Yeah? You have a quiz next week. It's going to be scenario-based multiple choice questions, which means that you'll have a case to read and then you're going to have to choose the best possible answer. The quiz is on Monday. Yes, sensation perception up until this point is part of the quiz. Okay? I have to check my calendar. It's on a Monday for sure. Ah, right, yeah, you guys, it was on week 10, so it's on the 29th. Sorry about the alarm. We'll discuss the quiz in detail next time. Go now. Don't worry, there is no quiz on Monday. Okay? Bye-bye.